guys, welcome back to the channel. I'm Callie, and today I saw this sound on TikTok and I thought it would make a really interesting video. And there's always a lot of talk about auto-buy-authors, and I have so many auto-buy-authors. I did a video, I think last year. I'll probably update again later this year because I'm always adding different auto-buy-authors. But even with auto-buy-authors, there are still books that I love and hate. And so I picked 5 of the authors on that list for me, and then one of my favorites and my least favorite that they have written. And it was just really interesting trying to gather the books for this idea, because I had to pick the different authors, tiering how much, I didn't necessarily hate the book, but I didn't love it as much as the others, and how everything worked together. So the first author that I have is Tessa Bailey, and this is the only romance writer that I have on this list. Tessa Bailey is one of my favorite romance authors, along with like Helena Hunting, Talia Hibbert, Jen DeLuca, and Rosie Danan. But she's the one that had the most amount of books that I've actually read. So for my favorite, I picked It Happened One Summer. I read this a month or so ago. This was the steamiest, best plotline story that she has. I started Tessa Bailey with her Fixer Up trilogy companion series. I read all of those and I loved them, and I actually read those first because I wanted to get to this one. And this one did not disappoint, being a very Schitt's Creek, and I've never really watched Schitt's Creek, but we have our heiress Piper, who essentially gets thrown into jail for throwing a wild party, and her dad cuts her off and sends her to this fishing village in Washington, and it's a complete 180 lifestyle from what she's used to. Her sister joins her because she feels kind of bad, and she meets this fisherman. Our story just kind of goes on from there, and I loved this so much. I devoured it. And this book is what solidified me as a Tessa Bailey auto-buy-author. Now, on the flip side, my least favorite of her books was Tools of Engagement. This is the final book in the companion series of the Fixer Up world. And this one, we're following Bethany. And Bethany was hyped up so much in the first 2 books. She was a fantastic side character. She was a perfect hype woman, wing woman to our other 2 main female characters. But her story was very lackluster for me. It was boring. The spice wasn't up to par. In this one, there were too many plot lines going on, and I feel like none of them were fulfilled. The main aspect is that she's doing this flip it challenge against her brother to prove a point that she is good at what she does. Obviously, we meet our love interest, who is an unexpected dad to his niece. He was new to town. I think that was also a little jarring, as it wasn't a character we were familiar with. We were wholly introduced to him in this book. So opposed to the other books where we're built up with all these other characters, he was the new guy in town. So we're also dealing with his adjustment to becoming a parent, and also trying to keep tabs on his sister and all of that. Plus they have this huge animosity going about. They butt heads a lot. And it didn't hit the same way as Fixer Up or Love Her or Lose Her. The next author that I have is Riley Sager, and Riley Sager is a thriller mystery writer, and he has a way of just terrifying me and enrapturing me in a story from page 1. So my favorite is Home Before Dark, which this deals with a dual timeline haunted house story. We're following this girl who 20 years later, her father in his will has left her this house. And the house was the same house that her and her family ran out of 20 years prior, and her mother died, or someone died in this house. I don't remember. And he wrote a book. He became really famous for this book and for this haunted house. She has always thought it was a hoax. So she goes to this house hoping to figure out what her father lied about, why this was this huge thing, if it was a lie, if it wasn't. And I loved the back and forth, because we also get snippets of his book, and we get snippets of his perspective from the events prior to present day. And I think everything wove together flawlessly. I give this book 5 stars. This book terrified me. It had a fantastic twist that I didn't see coming. And just everything about this book was just, this needs to be a film because I love it so much. And I think that this would make a fantastic movie or like mini series because it's so enrapturing. I read this cover to cover in one sitting because I couldn't put it down. I needed answers. My least favorite Riley Sager book would be actually their first, which is The Final Girls or Final Girls. This was the first book that I read by Riley Sager. I liked it, but it was okay. It was very predictable, and his books are typically how I would describe as unpredictable. This follows a girl who is a part of this club of the final girls. So in every film, there's always one girl that survives. This follows a group of those girls who have survived their own tragedy. The main one that we're following is a girl who was a part of this sorority massacre. And I think it's like 5 to 6 years later, she's trying to deal with that. And then the girls that she hasn't really bonded with them, but they have this sort of connection. Because they've all seen horrific tragedies and trauma, they start dying off. And she starts to make connections between that and the sorority massacre that she was a part of prior and tries to figure out who is killing these girls and why. Because everything seems to revolve around her and she's unsure as to why. It was good. Again, it wasn't my favorite. It was really predictable. I was able to guess who our perpetrator was pretty easily. What I will say is the rest of Riley Sager's books have a supernatural element to them, and I think that is what is so enrapturing, because this is the only one that didn't really have a supernatural element. It was more of just a straight up murder mystery. I still liked it. Obviously I didn't keep it because I don't have a copy of it anymore, but it was not my favorite. The next author that I have is Marissa Meyer, and she is a fantasy author, YA fantasy author, and she is most famous for the Cinder series, Renegades. She just came out with a new series, Gilded, which I haven't read yet, but I have it. I'll get to it eventually. As well as a contemporary, which is Instant Karma. Now, my favorite for Marissa Meyer is Cress, which is book 3 in the Lunar Chronicles. And what I really love about the Lunar Chronicles is each book follows a different perspective. In book 1, we have Cinders. Book 2, we have Scarlet, our Little Red Riding Hood. In book 3, we have Cress, who is our Rapunzel. And I love Cress's character so much. And what I love about the fact that, while yes, we get different perspectives, the same story and plot line interweaves with all of them. And we're not necessarily introduced to Cress in this book. We're actually introduced to Cress a little bit earlier. As a side character, and so we have that familiarity with her, and this book had the best action, the best romance. This is when we started making connections to the entire story, where we have Cinder, who is this cyborg, and each book follows the same tale as their fairy tale, but in a futuristic setting. Cress is a hacker who lives in a satellite, and a guy comes and tries to rescue her, gets blinded, and she is able to take really interesting elements of the original story and weave them into, and I thought Cress was the best aspect of that. And I think what I also loved about Cress is this is where we make those connections, where everything starts to kind of click into place. This is book 3 out of 4. So this one's definitely my favorite by far. I do need to do a reread of this series. I haven't since I actually finished it, so I should put that on my list of things to reread. Now, my least favorite, also don't have a copy of this book, so obviously if I don't like a book, I don't keep it. That is Instant Karma. I hated this book with every fiber of my being. The main character was so entitled and so uptight, and then was rewarded for that behavior. So we're following this very perfect girl who's trying to do a project with the seemingly lazy guy in her high school class, and she's constantly berating him, and she gets the ability to enact karma on people. And she tries to enact it on her partner, but then good things start to happen to him, and she's really frustrated as to why, when all she sees is surface level who he is as a person. I understand that the point of the story was to show that she grew and she learned, but I don't really feel like she grew. She became entitled She was entitled at the beginning and she became just a different type of entitled by the end of it. I hated her character the entire time. I am a type A personality. I was the person who led groups. I hated being a part of groups in school. I liked doing things on my own. I was the list maker and everything. So I did see myself a lot in the main character, but the way she treated people around her, her friends, was horrific. And I wanted all the bad things to happen to her, and she was rewarded. And it just, thinking about that book, every time I see it, I get angry all over again, because there was a lot of potential, and I did not see any payoff with this book. I hated it. Moving on, the next author that I have is another YA fantasy author, and that is Holly Black, which is actually, she's coming out with her first adult fantasy in a couple of months. I think in May is when it drops. But my favorite that she has written that I've read so far, I haven't read her entire backlog yet. I'm still working on it. But of the ones that I have read, my favorite is The Wicked King. This is book 2 in The Cruel Prince. I just think everything that The Cruel Prince represents, the political intrigue, the betrayal, the love, the enemies to lovers, all of that convalesces and is in this book. This is the best of the entire trilogy, in my opinion. I adored Jude in this. I adored Carden in this. The twists were fantastic. The action was nonstop. The political intrigue was really well executed. We're following right after the events of book 1. I won't obviously go into too much of what this is about, obviously because of spoilers, but I just feel like this held the most of the best things that The Cruel Prince has. And that's why I love it. My least favorite, I actually have a copy of this book because I did like it. I just didn't love it as much as the rest of her series, and that is The Darkest Part of the Forest. This is, I believe this came out, I know it was before Cruel Prince, but it came out after the Tithe series. And all of these series are all connected. So in this one, we follow a girl in the mortal realm, and there's this Fey prince who's in this glass coffin, very similar to Snow White. And one day, he wakes up and he ends up following this girl around. So it's her and her brother are trying to figure out why he's awake, how to help him. He's at a loss. I feel like this was I think this came out in the 2010s era, early 2010s era, and it felt like it. I definitely didn't read it at the time it came out, but it just felt very, very cliche. It was very predictable. It was still a cute story. I liked the twists of the gender roles within this story. I thought that was really well done. But it honestly, I forget that it exists half the time because it wasn't as enrapturing as Holly Black's other books. The last author that I have for this list is V.E.Schwab. I've read most of her backlog. I think the last thing that I have is her newest release and the archived series. And I don't want to read the archived because it's incomplete and we haven't heard anything about it being completed. Other than that, I've read all of her books. And my favorite one is definitely The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. We're following Addie, who is trying to escape a forced marriage and makes a deal with the dark. And that deal is she becomes immortal, but whenever she leaves the sight of someone else, they forget about her existence. And we follow her through centuries, different decades, until one day she enters a bookstore and someone remembers her. And we follow our story from there. This book was such a beautiful story. I loved every second of it. I loved the different conversations. I loved this book so much. It was phenomenal and extremely heart-wrenching of a story of, being able to put your mark on something. That was definitely one of the things I loved about it is Addie was able to find weird loopholes in being able to put her story out there of things that people would remember. It's just her name wasn't attached. And I found that to be a really interesting way to put her mark on history and how your mark on history affects you. And all of these things were just so amazingly written, and I love this book a lot. My least favorite V.E. Schwab book I definitely liked it, but again, not as much as all of the other ones, and that is The Near Witch. I believe this was her first published work. This follows a girl from a town who has grown up with tales of the Near Witch, and when children start disappearing from her town, she goes to try and find the witch because she thinks that that's who's stealing the kids. And we kind of get this story of this little lady in the outskirts of town who just wants to be left alone. And it's a really cute take. It's a cute story. I honestly didn't think it was long enough. I wish there was more to the story, and it definitely felt like a debut. There was just aspects that didn't necessarily make sense. There was just kind of confusing concepts with the world and with the mythology of everything. But I did enjoy it, just not as much as the rest of V.E.Schwab's works, because she has an amazing backlog of works. So that's gonna be it for today's video. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. We post videos every Tuesday, Thursday, with the occasional Sunday. If you have any auto-buy authors that you have, let me know down below. I'd love to check out other people's backlists. And that's gonna be it. I will see you guys in our next video. Bye.